Star Trek Voyager, Starfleet Academy, The Chance Factor, Chapter 5. A rush of anxious anticipation coursed through Catherine as Captain Holbrook walked onto the cargo loading dock. She chirped at Fiona in her travel cage and scratched Tango's neck. The gesture, she realized, steadied her nerves. The horse was more tranquil than any of them. "This is it, people." Captain Holbrook rubbed his hands together and smiled. "We've got some time before we begin transporting to the science vessel USS McMurray, so we might as well put it to good use." Catherine bit her lower lip to keep from smiling and sternly reminded herself why they were going to Tier 4. The mission was a serious test of Captain Holbrook's proposal to use animals in Starfleet. If the team failed to complete the exercise successfully, the captain's program would not get funding, and his reputation and credibility might be irrevocably damaged. Still, Catherine mused, she was about to transport to an Oberth-class starship for a 2-day journey to an alien planet on a real mission. She couldn't help it. She was thrilled. She smiled. Tier 4 is very much like Earth prior to its technological development, Captain Holbrook continued. The target area is a forested mountain region with plenty of running water and forage for the animals. "A picnic!" Thorne spat out the English word. Catherine shook her head. During the past week, she had learned something about her companions. Except for John, everyone attended the major educational institution on his or her homeworld. Thorne's father, a member of the Klingon High Council, had ordered his oldest son to participate in the mission as a means of advancing cooperation and understanding between the Federation and the Klingon Empire. Thorne had agreed under protest. He did not believe his warrior species could possibly benefit from an alliance with the weak peoples of the Federation. His attitude might have disastrous consequences for the Federation in the future. Thorne came from a powerful family and would probably sit on the Klingon High Council himself one day. Captain Holbrook ignored Thorne's remark. "Keep in mind that even though the plants on Tier 4 are not poisonous to you or the animals, they will not provide adequate nutrition. You must remember to feed your animals and yourselves the food supplements you'll be carrying with you." "We would not have food supplements if we crash-landed on an alien world," Endar said. "That is true, Endar," the captain replied patiently. "But this is not a survival exercise. Your mission is to extract a surveillance probe with a malfunctioning camouflage field before the region's native tribe finds it or spots you." Catherine studied the Tellarian's brooding face. Holbrook had taken advantage of an uneasy truce to contact the Tellarian government regarding the study. The captain had hopes of stabilizing relations between the Federation and Endar's homeworld by exposing the Tellarian teenager to young people from other worlds. Holbrook believed that working closely with kids from different cultures would show Endar how much the various species had in common. So far, Catherine reflected, Endar had made no effort to acquaint himself with anyone except Thorne. He had volunteered for the mission because he wanted to gather information for the Tellarians to use against the Federation in future conflicts. "I thought this planet didn't have any people," John said, frowning. Captain Holbrook chuckled. "It doesn't. We're going to pretend there's a primitive species on the planet as part of the mission parameters." "Oh." John nodded and lowered his gaze. Catherine wished she could help the Betazoid boy resolve his troubles, but John was still a puzzle. One moment he was outgoing and happy, and then suddenly he would withdraw. Captain Holbrook had told her that no one knew if John's telepathic abilities were emerging later than normal for his species, or if they were permanently impaired. Catherine had developed a huge amount of respect for John, although he felt handicapped by his deficiency, he had not let it stop him from using the talent he had. At 11, he was several years younger than everyone else. He had been asked to he had been asked to join the study because no one else could control the potentially useful but ordinarily uncontrollable Segal serpent and Manarch 4 sandbats. You'll be beamed in through a narrow window in a pretend ionized atmosphere, too, Captain Holbrook added. What is the point of creating obstacles that do not exist? Talora asked. Catherine suppressed a grin. The Vulcan was genuinely bewildered by the concept of make-believe. Talora was equally mystified by the tendency of other species to soften the truth. Catherine herself had been forced to hide her true feelings when Talora announced that she intended to pursue a diplomatic career. Ambassador Sarek was Talora's hero, or at least the Vulcan equivalent of one. However, whether Sarek had learned his diplomatic skills from being married to a human and raising his half-human son Spock, or from experience, he knew it was sometimes necessary to curb blunt and brutal truth to keep opposing governments negotiating. Nor was it productive to attack an individual's self-esteem or insult his culture. Catherine liked Talora in spite of her unyielding dedication to total honesty without regard to the consequences. She had tried to explain the difference between an outright lie and evading or shading destructive truth, but Talora just didn't get it. With luck, Catherine thought, the fate of the Federation would never depend on Talora's diplomatic abilities. Ouch. Captain Holbrook deftly fielded Talora's question without making her feel stupid for asking it, although Catherine realized his consideration for her feelings was probably lost on the Vulcan. The mission would not be a thorough test of using animals in non-technological situations if there weren't any obstacles to overcome or specific criteria to satisfy. But, the captain emphasized, since Starfleet does not send students on dangerous missions, it's necessary to establish fabricated conditions instead, like a simulation. Talora nodded thoughtfully. Yes, that is logical. The transporter chief entered, and the discussion ended. Captain Holbrook directed Catherine and her animals to beam up first. Nothing seemed to upset the quarter horse, and Holbrook was counting on Tango's calm nature to soothe his alien companions when they arrived in the ship's cargo bay. Stalls and supplies were already set up and waiting. As Catherine led Tango up the ramp to the transporter pad, she was struck by an unexpected and powerful realization. She had worked her whole life to get accepted into Starfleet Academy, and she had succeeded. But then, on the eve of leaving for school, she had discovered that the prospect of a Starfleet career no longer excited her. Since she had arrived on campus, that lack of desire had nagged at her, even though she had subconsciously ignored it. It had shadowed her through classes and simulations, and all the way into Commander Brannon's office. She hadn't been sure Starfleet was what she wanted or where she belonged. Now, as Catherine waited to beam up to the science ship with a horse and a hawk, she suddenly knew. Starfleet was the only place in the universe Catherine Janeway wanted to be. But Commander Brannon still had to be convinced, and this mission was her best chance, maybe even her last chance, to prove she belonged at Starfleet Academy. The transporter chief's hand paused over the controls as a clattering of heavy feet drew everyone's attention. Hav Nej, whose name translated as Starseeker, apparently wanted to go back to the barn. Thorne was struggling to keep the armor-plated organic tank from leaving. "Mev!" the Klingon commanded the Sark to stop, and pushed against the animal's chest. Neither action had any effect until Jup jumped in front of Hav Nej and squealed. The Targ stopped the Sark and upset most of the other animals. Catherine tightened her grip on Tango's lead shank when his head snapped up, but he didn't jump or bolt. Fiona shrieked from the cage sitting on the adjacent transporter disk, and Catherine cooed to quiet her. The cell at Chaka sprang protectively in front of Talor and roared. Shammy, the Vulcan's white Zabathu, kicked, toppling a stack of cargo canisters. Perched on Endar's head, Foos began spitting. The silver-haired Testian almost gored Rayonica with his ribboned horn. You try reading this. This is hard. John screamed as the dinosaur lunged backward. Her right head flicked a lightning-fast tongue toward the tasty-looking spider. Leaping out of range, Endar yanked Ginjar away from the serpent and set the hook spider on the Tessian's back. Without a word of warning, he stormed toward Thorn and slammed his fist into the Klingon's jaw. Thorn staggered in surprise and rammed Endar in the stomach with his head, sending both of them sprawling on the floor. Captain Holbrook waved to the transporter chief as he hurried across the floor to stop the brawl. As the warm tingle of molecular dematerialization washed through Catherine, her mind focused on a single thought. Staying in the academy and completing Holbrook's study mission were not her biggest problems. The team would be lucky to survive one another. Chapter 6. To Catherine's surprise, the journey to Deer 4 aboard the USS McMurray passed without another disruptive incident between team members. Although Endar refused to apologize for attacking Thorn on the cargo loading dock, the Klingon did not hold a grudge. Both boys had been struggling to keep their aggressive natures under control during training at the academy for the mission. The fight had taken the edge off the explosive pressures building within them. On the ship, they had spent their free time playing Parisi squares with the McMurray crew. Everyone was relieved that the young warriors had found an acceptable outlet for their violent energies. Catherine hoped that the trek through the mountains of Deer 4 would be so physically exhausting that Endar and Thorn would be too tired to fight. Talor had taken every opportunity to observe and talk with crew members from several different species. Her curiosity was welcome, even though her blunt questions and remarks sometimes left her study subjects stunned and speechless. However, the Vulcan's total lack of tact was balanced by a guileless innocence and genuine interest that the seasoned ship's personnel found oddly charming. Still, hoping to avert an intergalactic incident of cataclysmic proportions in the near or distant future, Catherine continued to coach Talor in the art of diplomacy. Most of the time, she felt like she was talking to the proverbial brick wall. John kept to himself, turning to Rayonica and the Sandbats for company when the team wasn't busy with preparations. When they assembled in the McMurray's cargo bay to be transported to the surface of Deer 4, Catherine was brimming with confidence. Everyone worked together, checking gear and loading supply racks onto their animals. For the first time since joining the expedition, she actually felt like they could pull it off. That's good coffee. Okay. Captain Holbrook looked pleased and relieved as he gave them their final instructions. The surveillance probe is located near the native tribe's ceremonial site. It's marked on your maps. You must remove the probe and leave the area before the tribe arrives to conduct a seasonal ritual at dawn the day after tomorrow. It should take you roughly a day and a half to reach the site. The probe is really there, but the native people aren't, right? John asked. The captain nodded. Once you've got the probe, you'll have the rest of tomorrow and the next day to reach the beam-out site. Transport off Deer 4 is scheduled for sundown. If you're late, you'll miss the window. The ionized atmosphere, that really isn't ionized, Thorn muttered. You won't be stranded on the planet if you're late, Thorn. Holbrook eyed the Klingon narrowly. But if all the conditions we've established for the mission aren't satisfied, you'll fail. Thorn puffed out his chest. Klingons do not fail. I hope not. Holbrook paused. One more thing. Although we won't be in direct communication with you, we will be monitoring your progress and activities through your locator badges. If a real danger should arise, you'll be beamed out immediately. Endar and Thorne glanced at each other and rolled their eyes. For once, Catherine agreed with them. If Holbrook transported the team off the planet at the first sign of trouble, they wouldn't have a fair chance to test themselves or his theories. Like Thorne, Catherine did not want to fail. See you in 3 days. Good luck. Holbrook stepped back and nodded to Catherine. Since Tango's quiet presence had a calming effect on the other animals, she had been chosen to go first again. With Fiona perched on her leather-gloved hand, Catherine led the horse onto the transporter pad and rode a phased matter stream through the vacuum of space to an alien wilderness world. She materialized in a clearing surrounded by tall, lush trees with broad emerald green leaves. The pungent musk of decaying vegetation hung in the cool air, teasing her nostrils. That's a weird turn of phrase. Anyway, she heard the splash of water cascading over rocks in a stream nearby. Lifting his head, Tango snorted and stomped his foot. The hawk flapped her wings, anxious to fly after 2 days of confinement. Soon, Fiona, Catherine murmured as Thorne appeared. Hovnej and Jup both shook themselves and grunted. The Klingon, Sark, and Targ all tilted their heads back and tested the alien scents wafting from the forest. Thorne drew in a deep breath and nodded approval. It's invigorating, isn't it? Catherine sensed that the Klingon was as comfortable in the primal forest as he was in a 24th century starship. Unlike humans, the Klingon species' primitive instincts had not become dulled as they adapted to controlled environments and technology. She found that strangely comforting. Yes, it makes the longing to hunt, run, hot in the blood. A rare smile curled the corner of Thorne's mouth as he pulled a map out of his saddlebag. John blinked as the transporter beam deposited him and Rhaonica on firm ground. The dinosaurs' heads adjusted themselves to scan in all directions. The boy's eyes widened as he looked around, then caught Catherine's gaze. This is a wild place, isn't it? Catherine smiled to reassure him. Nothing you can't handle, John. I think Rhaonica likes it. The serpent sniffed the rich soil with her center head, froze, then snatched a burrowing beetle into her mouth with her tongue. The other two heads calmly continued to scan the strange surroundings. John laughed and relaxed. Even Endar looked pleased with the wild beauty of Deer 4. The Testaean and the hook spider remained calm in the unfamiliar environment, and Catherine wondered if the Talarian homeworld was similar. She would have asked, but she didn't want Endar to accuse her of fishing for sensitive information again. Since he was using the mission to spy on the Federation, he assumed the Federation members of the team were gathering intelligence on his world, too. Talor only glanced around with mild curiosity. Chaka, the Selot, immediately began to walk the perimeter of the clearing, checking for unseen dangers. The camel-like Shami snapped her head up and tensed. The Zabathu's ears flicked toward the sound of the stream, and a nervous twitch rippled down her skin. Easy, Shami, Talor soothed the Zabathu. She's from a desert planet. Maybe running water upsets her. She'll have to get used to it, Thorne growled. He tapped the map he had unfolded and placed on a large rock. The shortest route to the ceremonial cliff follows the river through a canyon to the west. Talor frowned. Rhaonica likes water, John said. Catherine dropped Tango's reins and went to peer over Thorne's shoulder. The horse had been trained to ground tie and would not move until she told him to. Although they had been thoroughly briefed about the terrain, the weather, and the wildlife on the planet, the route had not been decided prior to landing as part of the exercise.
If we go that way, Thorn, we'll have to climb the steep side of the mountain to reach the probe.
Catherine stabbed her finger at the elevation on the map. She did not want to point out that the Andorian Zabathu might not be willing or able to navigate a river route.
No problem,
Endar patted the six-legged Testion's neck.
Ginjar can climb anything.
But the other animals can't, Catherine countered.
We have to choose a path that's passable for everyone, one that exposes us to the least amount of danger.
You don't have to worry, human, Thorn rumbled. If you are in danger, Captain Holbrook will beam you out before you get hurt.
I have no intention of being beamed out until the mission is completed, Thorn.
Catherine stiffened.
And I don't think you understand what Captain Holbrook meant.
What did he mean?
Endar asked suspiciously.
If we run into trouble, we'll all be transported back to the ship. This isn't a contest. It's a mission. Either the whole team makes it, or none of us does.
Thorn scowled.
If this were a Klingon mission, the only objective would be getting the probe out. It would not matter how many were lost along the way as long as one succeeded in the end.
This is not a Klingon mission, Talor eyed Thorn levelly and pressed closer to the Zabathu. No one is expendable. Although she wouldn't say so, the Vulcan did not want any harm to come to Shammy. Catherine realized. If water made the Andorian animal nervous, she might panic, bolt, and injure herself on the rocks. The team had to take all the animal's needs into consideration.
We should go northwest,
Catherine suggested.
We'll gain altitude gradually, and all the animals can handle the terrain.
Endar scanned the map.
That route is longer. It'll add hours to the trip.
Will we get to the probe site on time? John asked hesitantly.
It'll be tight, Catherine admitted, but we can make it.
We only have 3 days to secure the probe and reach the beam-out point, Thorn insisted. Better to save as much time as we can.
Saving time won't mean anything if we don't get there at all.
Catherine matched the Klingon's stubborn gaze. A logical and accurate conclusion, Thorn, Talor said. Catherine's earlier expectations about successfully completing the mission began to unravel. They hadn't even left the landing site, and already they were hopelessly at odds. If they couldn't agree on a route, they wouldn't be able to agree on a lot of things. They'd waste more time arguing than they would taking longer but safer trail.
Who put you in command?
Endar glared at Catherine. Catherine started. Why hadn't Captain Holbrook appointed someone as team leader? It's a good question, and she could reach only one conclusion. Klingons and Talarians had been sworn enemies of the Federation for a long time. A fragile and perhaps temporary peace did not automatically dissolve the bad feelings that existed between them. Maybe this wasn't just a study of how animals might be used in non-tech conditions. Maybe their ability to cooperate was being tested too. Captain Holbrook hadn't told them because it wouldn't be a true test if they knew.
But it's a test we seem doomed to fail, Catherine thought.
She immediately rejected that possibility. They were 5 distinctly different species, with 10 alien animals, all with their individual abilities and limitations, and all operating on their own agendas. But if they could learn to work together, to use one another's strengths, to offset everyone's weaknesses, they could accomplish everything they had been sent to do. Someone has to make a decision, Talor said.
Agreed.
Thorn stared at the Vulcan.
We'll take the river route.
John raised his hand and spoke cautiously. I think we should go the way Catherine said.
I do not take orders from a woman, Endar's eyes flashed.
Turn this squabbling group into a team?
Catherine's confidence bottomed out as they voted 3-2 to take the safer northwest route.
Hopeless,
but it was a challenge she couldn't refuse.